Do you ever feel like a helpless leaf being blown around in the winds of poker variance? Do you ever come to your poker session filled with optimism and hope, only to walk away a deflated mess?
Oh, I hate this damn game.
Does poker impact your relationships with your loved ones?
Listen here, you goddamn son of a bitch.
Does it stop you from getting a real job? If any of these things apply, then you, my friend, need poker therapy. It's important to pick a therapist who really dresses the part. That means beige blazers and pink t-shirts. If you're dealing with a guy in a hoodie, he's probably a scammer. Today's session is all about therapizing our student Jess. She brings to the table 3 of her biggest mental game leaks, and we get to work. If you like today's coaching session, then why not check out Poker Therapy? It's a little known mental game book I wrote a few years ago, and it's available on carrotcorner.com. Now let's get to today's video. So Jess, this is the first official Poker Therapy mental game coaching session that we've had. I think this is a very underdone area of coaching. There's not a lot of content out there on YouTube or anywhere. You never see mental game coaching sessions on Twitch, for example. So I thought this would be really cool for people to see. And you've mentioned to me that you've got quite a few mental game issues that you feel have been swept under the rug or not addressed properly yet. So why don't we just have a chat today for 30, 40 minutes, something like that. And we'll see if we can get through these 3 topics that you've brought and see if we can just help you a bit.
Yeah.
Improve in how you deal with these things.
Yes, sounds good.
So hit me with the first one. What's the first mental game topic for today?
This is obviously one we've been dealing with, but I am still having a massive, massive problem with this is results orientation. And I think it may be linked to another one. So I've got 3 points, and I think the second one is actually maybe linked to the results orientated. But yeah, I'm still crazy results orientated. It's always been a huge problem for me, and I am noticing more now that I'm hiding the results. Like, I am noticing a bit more calmness and like happiness at the end of a session, because I just kind of like, right, that session's done. And that's it. Like, I'm not ruminating on sort of stuff. But I guess it's maybe linked as well. Sometimes I always want to end a session when I'm ahead. Like if I, everybody has it every now and then, like first 15 minutes of a session, you end up like 2 or 3 buy-ins up. And I always have this thing in the back of my head, like, shall I just end it now? And it's kind of difficult on stream, obviously, because I've only been streaming 20 minutes. So it's normally a no. But there's always something in my head that's like, maybe we should just finish this now and like, pocket the 3 buy-ins and just play 10 minutes today. I think they're all kind of linked, and it's still a huge problem for me. I'm still very, very results orientated and kind of, focusing on the money, kind of the points that we're running.
So previously you were like checking graphs in the middle of sessions and stuff like that, right? Looking at bankroll during sessions, that kind of thing.
Yeah, 100%. I'd always be checking my graphs.
So it was almost like we had this really, really strong desire to have a winning session that put you in a frame of mind, what on Poker Distilled that Melissa and I have been referring to as mode 2 thinking. I don't know if you've listened to that episode yet on Poker Distilled.
Yes, I have. The 3 modes. I didn't take, that was when I was driving, and I've been meaning to listen to that one again, actually, because I think that was kind of, didn't get processed properly because I was driving busy. So I was going to listen to that one again.
We'll go through it. So mode 1 is you kind of poker intuitions when you're playing your A game and you're just picking up on things and you know what's going on and you're in the zone. You're making good choices based on your subconscious firing on all cylinders. We like mode 1. We want to be in mode 1 as often as possible, but we also understand that it's hard to be in mode 1. We need a certain relaxed and focused, energetic mentality to be in mode 1. And we also need to have quite a lot of positivity usually going on in order to do that. Mode 2 is the bad one. It's like the monster under the bed that we want to keep at bay. Mode 2 is your basically cravings, desires, fears, anxieties. Whenever we are like willing a state of affairs to happen or not to happen, we can say that we are in mode 2. And mode 2 will very often present thought processes that sound a bit like logic, sound a bit like mode 3, which we'll talk about in a second, but are actually quite deeply manipulative and coercive and are trying to bring about a certain state of affairs. So for example, if you are overcome with results orientation, which is your first topic today, in the sense that you really crave a winning session, you really desire that, and if you desire a winning session that strongly, it's probably fair to say that you fear a losing session as well. How are you with losing generally? Do you feel like pretty crappy after a losing session or after you get stacked?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the reasons why kind of hiding the balance and stuff and not really checking my graphs after has helped quite a bit. Not just with my poker game, but like just my general mental health, I suppose, after poker. Because yeah, losing sessions, especially if it was like the 3rd or 4th one that week and I was like going through this downswing, it would really, really get to me. It would be annoying.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really normal. So the mode 2 thinking then is both fearing a bad state of affairs and craving a good one. And the audience at home is probably able to relate to this as well. It's a very common thing. One of the problems is that when we're in mode 2 like that, all of our energy and mental processes that are running, if you imagine that your brain is like an operating system or a desktop or something like that, and you have all these icons or apps that could be fired up, if we're running loads of apps that have the purpose of bringing about a certain state of affairs, these are to do with hoping and fearing, etc., it's going to actually take up a lot of our disk space or RAM or whatever. I'm not a computer person, you are, so I probably sound like an idiot, but it's taking up a lot of resources that we would want to allocate to the other modes. Mode 1 doesn't actually use a lot of resources. It's like an effortless breeze. It's just like you're in the zone. Mode 3 needs a lot of resources because mode 3 is actually conscious competence. It's conscious processing. It's logic. It's you basically taking the ideas from the Carrot Poker School that you've been learning, the ideas from these coaching sessions that you've been learning, and also just stuff that you are working on your own, and turning that into the right button clicks at the table, so to speak. That's what mode 3 is all about. So the reason we want to get out of mode 2 as quickly as possible is that, one, the programs it runs, which are things like win this pot at all costs, you had problem calling down in big pots before too often. This sort of leak comes from the mode 2 thought process of you have to win this pot, losing this pot's unacceptable, it's not okay, we won't be okay if we lose this pot. So that kind of desire is bad because it makes us play badly, but it's also bad because it fills up the full operating space and it stops the mode 3 programs from being able to function, like the logic from being able to be ingrained. It stops your game moving forward consciously, and it stops you obviously clicking the right buttons a lot of the time, as we said. We want to get out of these mode 2 thought processes as soon as possible. One way to do that is to actually really look at them, face them like the boogeymen that they are, and sort of say, what do you want from me, mate? Like, what is it you actually want right now? Let's try actually doing that. Let's picture yourself in, you can choose either a winning session or a losing session. Which one do you want to go for first?
Let's go for winning.
Okay, so you're winning, you're up like 3 buy-ins, it's gone well, but you can feel that urge seeping in to be risk adverse. Are you risk adverse at the table when you're up money as well in an attempt to like bag the money?
Yeah, you know what? I probably am as well. Yeah.
Because if you want to leave because you don't want to lose money, if you do stay, you probably avoid spots that you should be taking that require investment. So you're in a hand, you're considering making a call that you know is right on the river, or you strongly suspect from like logic could be right, and you should do the analysis and figure out if you should make that call. But there's a niggling program there that's eating away at your psyche, and it's going, fold. If you fold, you can keep most of this 3 buy-ins that you're up. You can like log a good score. We don't want to take the spot. We don't want to feel the horrible feelings of calling and losing. And suddenly the decision is all about which emotion will come next and not about what we should do. The brain really is motivated by future emotion. Like, why do you not do something horrible to someone? Yes, it's because you don't want to behave that way, but it's also because you know you'll feel awful if you do. It's this guilt. It's this, we know we're going to feel things in the future that we don't want to feel, and that motivates us in the present. So you're on the river. This program is kicking off, and it's saying, oh, you should really fold here to avoid that future state of affairs. What do you think it's trying to protect you from? Like, if that was a protector or like a kind of bad parent of a program, what is that parent like trying to protect the child you from in that case, do you think?
It's trying to kind of protect me from feeling bad if we do lose that hand. When the hands get turned over and we lose, I'm obviously going to be like, oh my God, I was doing so well and now I'm not, and it's break even. Like, it's protecting us from that kind of feeling.
And that's a very legitimate thing to try to do, right? Like, it's actually well-meaning. We could say, even though we don't like its effect, it's not a program born out of malice or self-destruction. It's actually a program that's trying to protect you. It's trying to help you. Okay. What we need to do then, and this is something that I got firstly from Elliot Rowe, who worked for Run It Once for a while and made a course there. He was a hypnotherapist and just general kind of psychotherapist, I believe, although I might be getting his actual profession title wrong. And one of the things that he did with students was something called a 3-step sort of process. So the idea of this roughly was, and I've been using this myself in coaching, I think it's a relatively common thing in that domain, is to actually embrace the fear, like embrace the phobia. Like if you were afraid of spiders and you wanted to get over it, probably the only way to do it is to put a bunch of spiders in your face or something like that eventually. So the first step of this 3-step process is actually to accept the worst case scenario, like to imagine that it's unfolded, imagine that it's actually happened. The second thing that the technique recommends is to then prepare an optimal response. Like, how would the optimal Jess actually react to the worst case scenario happening? So if like you did lose, all your profits for that session, would you be okay? Could you form a strategy so that you would be okay? Because if we know we can handle something, we're not going to act as irrationally in the face of it as a threat. If we know we've got a plan to actually handle it. Then the third thing is to motivate yourself through positive emotion by thinking, well, what would be the upside if I cured myself of this? Like, why am I incentivized or motivated to cure myself of this? So we're going to imagine a worst case scenario. We're going to plan how optimal Jess can handle it so that we don't need this kind of parental Jess to step in anymore. And then thirdly, we're going to think about all the gains and upsides of actually treating this mental game leak. And this is going to be a process. So what do you think? Shall we give it a crack?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
That's good.
So I'd like you to imagine that, and I'm not a hypnotherapist like Elliot Rowe is, so I'm not going to do this as well, but I'd like you to imagine that you are winning 3 buy-ins on GG Poker 25 Russian cash. You're up, your stacks, say 200 big blinds, 200 big blinds, 210 big blinds. You're on the river. There's like a 60 big blind bet from an opponent, and it looks like an interesting decision that may well be a call. I'd like you to imagine that you do call. And I'd like you to imagine that you lose the pot, and that's 60 of your big blinds gone. Pot moves to your opponent. Another hand comes and you get stacked. Another hand comes, you get stacked again, you get stacked again, you get stacked again. You're now down 2 buy-ins for the session, and you decide enough is enough, and you decide to just take a break and close down the tables for a second there, just to give yourself a bit of breathing space. So have you imagined that for me?
Yes.
How are you feeling in this moment?
Like horrendous.
Talk to me about that. In what way?
Just feeling like the last hour or however long I've been playing was a waste of time because, I'd turned a positive result into a massively negative one. And if maybe I'd quit earlier, then it wouldn't have been so much of a waste of time because we would have been in profit. And I'm very, very annoyed for not ending my session, probably. Yeah, I'm annoyed at, just not finishing.
Yeah, so that feels shit, right? So let's just sit with that for a second. Let's just feel shit, because that's the point of this first step. It's not to say, oh no, it's actually not that bad. Oh, you're just being silly. Like, no, these are like real emotions, and these reactions are how you would react in the moment. So to say that that's not logical and we shouldn't do it isn't going to help us right now. That is how you're going to react if this happens. And so we need to sit with that for a minute. So that feels shit. Fine.
Yeah.
Let's just wallow in it. You can't look like you're about to laugh as you're wallowing. It doesn't work. Wallowing while being like sniggering away. Anyway, I'll put you back to the misery of this for a second, because that's the point. So that feels bad. There's a lot of anger at yourself going on. There's a lot of I wish, if only. There's a lot of if onlying going on here. If onlying is a mental program where you're like, I wish that this was the reality instead of this other thing. And that's type 2 thinking as well. Whenever we wish that something wasn't true is true, that's actually really useless and counterproductive. It doesn't help bring it about, usually just that forlorn wishing. We're in this spot where we feel this way. Now, I'd like you to just start to move away from that. And I'd like you to imagine a different version of yourself. And this is you in the future, maybe years down the line, who knows? And this person is actually cured. This version of you is over this mental game leak and processes the losing in the best way possible. What I'd like you to do now is imagine not what you're like now or what you'd be like if this happened to you tomorrow, but what is this optimal version of you like when you have this losing session, step away from the tables, and the fortune reversal has taken your +3 and turned it into -2. How do you think the optimal pro poker player, Jess, computes that and handles that, and how does she feel about it?
I think she just feels like that's just the game, is just very accepting that that's just how it goes sometimes. And it could have easily gone the other way. Instead of 3 buy-ins, we could have been 5 buy-ins up. There will be times that happens instead, and just being a bit more kind of accepting that, like, this is the game I choose to play in my spare time. And that's just what happens.
What good things could happen to you if you got into the habit of accepting losses?
I think it'd be kind of it'd just be better, I suppose, mental health, a better attitude when I turn up for my next session, because I won't still be wallowing in the session that happened yesterday. And then obviously a better game follows on from that when I'm turning up with a better attitude and having a bit of a fresher feeling towards the game.
What's your relationship like outside of poker with poker, like between poker and your outside life? What does optimal Jess's relationship look like with poker?
Oh, I don't know, actually. Just doesn't let it affect her kind of day to day. It's just something, it's a hobby that I have. And if it's really, really affecting me that bad, then maybe it's not a good hobby for me. But just not really being affected outside of the game.
Is it fair to say that optimal Jess is still like not happy that she's had a losing day? Like, that's fair. Like, we're never going to be happy about it. We're never going to be like, yes, I lost 3 bands. Cool. This is all part of variance. That's unrealistic. But maybe it's like a more minor and short-lived disappointment followed by a quick acceptance. I think the key word here that optimal Jess is using, that current Jess isn't, is just acceptance. It's like saying, I have a video on this topic on YouTube called literally acceptance. And the thumbnail is like me like doing yoga pose. I've never done yoga in my life, but you know, we do these things in like a Buddhist monastery or something. Shout out editor, well done. So we have that to check out as well, guys, if you want more on this topic. But yeah, acceptance is just, it's such a big part of what you just described to me there. Okay, cool. So when it comes to upsides then, which is the third stage, what are some other benefits that might be possible if you can move from your current self to this optimal version of yourself that we imagined?
Just kind of have better sessions because I'm not wallowing in the past all the time.
Better in what way?
Not like in a results way, but like calmer at the table, making better decisions, not making decisions to avoid like another losing session or something. Because it might be that the very next session we end up in the same spot where it's quite a thingy call. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to start off losing again. So I make a fold. That is also kind of is having the problem in it because you're still making decisions based on your results from the past, and it would be an upside would just be to kind of turn up to each session fresh, like it's a clean slate, it's a new game of poker, and it doesn't remember that you've been on a downswing. It's just a new session.
That's it. Yeah, the patterns are wholly of our own creation. They're random.
Yeah,
we talked before about being a moon hippie. When we like look at our monthly graph, we're actually saying, well, what our months are like to do with the tide and the moon and stuff like this. Why are those useful benchmarks to measure things under? They're not. Yeah. That's really interesting. You mentioned they're like not in a results way, but like not to fuel your results orientation. But if a couple of years went past, who would have better results, skill level being equal, you know, like technical skill level being equal? You just now are the optimal version of you in this respect. Who would have better results? Yeah,
the optimal version for sure, because they would just be turning up with a fresh mind and like playing their A game more often. Definitely, that would just improve my results and get me moving up through the limits.
So it's interesting that the very thing that we are afraid and kind of obsessing about in the moment with that worst case scenario prevention program is actually the same thing that's stopping you getting better results. So it's almost like destroying your chances at obtaining the thing that it's trying to obtain while it's trying to do that. It's like really self-defeating in a way, like that program. So what I'd like you to do then is quite regularly, maybe before you start playing poker every day is a good time to do this. You could take 30 seconds for each of those phases that we just did there and actually visualize them and just imagine them and try and live them for 30 seconds. It might mean closing your eyes, doing a brief little meditation and saying, okay, I'm going to picture that worst case scenario. And every time you do it, I want you to try and feel the emotions of despair and regret and self-loathing. I want you to feel those things. When you're doing the optimal version of yourself and you're planning that optimal response, I want you to like try and feel that ambivalence and that maturity as a poker player and that acceptance and that sort of zen. And then when you're doing the upside visualization, the third part, I want you to try to picture the winning graph after a couple of years, the higher standard of play, the fresh slate when you rock up to another session. I want you to picture those regularly because this is going to teach your subconscious that there is another way to go about this. Just this chat that we're having, this isn't enough to reprogram you. There's a lot of deep wiring here. So that's why you have to go away and talk about this with other people. Make it real. Message a friend and say, this is me now, this is optimal me, and this is the upside of changing it. Do things like that. It makes the connections stronger and it makes them more real. Let's go back to that program now, the mental program that says you should quit your session because if you lose, it will be painful. What would you say? Let's speak to that program now. What would you say to that version of yourself? And try to be compassionate, try to be understanding, try to be a teacher or guru to that program. How could you help it understand the world better?
I would just say it's just a part of the game. Like sometimes we will have losing sessions and we shouldn't be scared of having a losing session because, you know, it's just variance and poker. Just don't freak out about it. Don't focus too hard on losing sessions because it's just a session. The next one could be a winner. Like it doesn't actually mean anything in the long run.
How does that mental program treat you?
Well, it's not treating me very well because it's stopping me kind of playing. It's stopping me making good decisions. It's just not a great program, is it?
No, so let's think about its relationship to you now. So is that kind of parental, do you think, in some way, but maybe misguided? Like it's kind of saying, you need to do what's best for you. We need to protect you. Like, it's probably quite parental in that way. It's got that sort of relationship. But then it's kind of saying, if you lose now because you stay, on your head be it, I warned you. I hate to say I told you so. It's your fault, you idiot. You caused this. Yeah. So not only is it kind of misguided, over the top, tyrannical parenting, but it's also really unfair blame culture going on here. Like, this program is saying, like, you will be responsible for this if you mess up, because in your worst case scenario wallowing, it was very much about, we could have avoided this had we only acted on the advice from earlier. And that's actually the child you looking up to the parent and going, damn it, you were right. I should have stopped my session. That's reinforcing the mental program, Jess. So that's why in the optimal response, we are above the program in terms of maturity, not the other way around. Say you have an angry dad shouting at a kid, and it's, you will do this, blah, 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 and it's like bad, it's not being a good dad, right, whatever. But the kid is still below the dad in terms of like the hierarchy. This parent and tells the child what to do. The child does what they're told because they're 4 years old and, you know, they weigh about 30 pounds compared to like the 200 of the dad. So they have to do what they're told, right? This is like the natural sort of way it goes. But there's no reason why your mental program should be above you in the hierarchy of selves. There's no reason why it should command you. You can actually say, well, when I'm optimal me, I can grab the reins and I can say, hey, I see what you're trying to do, but you're misguided because of this, this, and this. And you can sort of depower that program. You can become above it in the hierarchy such that you are the adult and it's now a misguided child, rather than you being a scared child and it being a tyrannical parent.
Yes.
There's a psychotherapeutic technique called schema therapy. Don't know if you've heard of it, but it kind of places different versions of the self in these modes, like parent mode. And there's different types of parent. There's like very lenient, loving parent. There's like angry, horrible, punitive parent. There is different modes of child. There's explorative, curious child. There's insecure, sort of scared child. And then there's healthy adult. So it might also be useful in the coming weeks to place yourself in these modes at the time. So when you're fearing losing, feeling desperate, like you have to win this pot or whatever it may be, like, who is that? Like, what version of yourself is that? You know, is that a healthy adult version? Or is that one of the child schema? Or is it one of the parent schema stepping in? And then the idea is to empower this adult version to rise above and say, I see what you guys are doing. I can see your interaction. You're shouting at this child. This child wants to explore, but this one's scared, and the punitive parent shouting at this one. But you sort of mediate as the adult. You step in and say, no, this is the situation and we've got this and we're okay.
Yeah.
The whole point about this is to feel okay so that you don't need these programs anymore. Because imagine you're optimal Jess now, and this is the last thing I want you to imagine on this front before we move on. How does optimal Jess view that protective program that wants you to close down the table so you don't lose? How does she view that? What's her relationship to that program?
I suppose it'd be the same as like a rebellious teenager. It'd be just saying that program doesn't do anything. It's not, yeah, it's like when a dad or mum is shouting at you, telling you to do something, you're like, whatever, like you don't know what you're talking about.
So
like
optimal Jess is like Harry Enfield, like a rebellious teenager, just like, no, fuck off, mum. It's just like, okay, that works. Yeah. But maybe optimal Jess could actually be even more mature than that. It could actually just be like, I'm the adult. You're actually the child. Like, maybe the program is the scared one here. And like, we are actually now in control and we're okay. So we can maybe even do better than just being a rebellious teenager.
Yeah. Okay.
But yes, you are rebelling. It's good. So that, what that shows is that you're growing up there mentally. You're like, your version of yourself has just gone from scared conforming child. It's like, you're right, we should have stopped our session, to rebellious teenager. You're not all the way at healthy adult yet in this imaginative exercise, but you've actually ascended there. You're now like, no, you're not quite at the fully formed, okay, let's talk about this rationally. You're actually wrong here, blah, blah, blah. You're not there yet, but you're moving from child to adult there in your own imagination. So I think it's about seeing optimal Jess, not just as this bold rebel that says no to the program, but actually as a completely in control, healthy adult that just says, this is the reality. This is the logic. We're fine. Yeah. We don't need you.
Healthy adult who goes running 2 or 3 times a week.
There you go.
Weighs less than 12 stone.
You could think about all the changes you want to make in your lifestyle. They could all be part of this. That healthy version of you who doesn't fear the results going the other way, who can handle losing. Yeah, her lifestyle probably is different in some positive ways that you want to achieve. So, okay.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
So I'd like you to do those exercises a few times a day before you play, basically, just for like 30 seconds each.
Nice.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it all makes sense. It's just being a bit more mindful, isn't it? It's just mindfully playing poker instead of just sitting there pressing buttons and getting angry or happy for no reason. Just kind of be mindful about things and like actually sit down at a session and wanting to think. Like, I think a lot of the times I turn up at a session and just like log in, jump on 2 tables, press some buttons, and then for an hour, I'm like, yeah, that's me played an hour, but that'll do.
So now we're on to self-image. So how would you see yourself if you were a successful poker player? You'd be curious. So going back to like the schema, the personas here, there's vulnerable child and then there's curious, explorative child. If you imagine like going into a household and seeing a kid playing with building blocks and exploring and putting stuff in their mouth and all of that, that's like the explorative child. And then the vulnerable child is obviously what you would see when the child's not okay, they're too hungry to function, they're like crying or whatever. That's like the vulnerable child kind of persona. You need to kind of ask yourself, well, who is that person that is wanting to think, as you put it, that wants to problem solve, that wants to play hands well, that's curious, that's explorative. That's like you trying to master the world. That's what we do when we're explorative child. So it's all about schema. It's all about personas. We want less tyrannical parent. We want less vulnerable child. It's a very common relationship between tyrannical parent and vulnerable child. They tend to pop up as a pair very frequently. From the limited reading I've done on this, I'm by no means an expert, guys. So, you know, if you want to slate me in the comments for being an amateur shrink, you can go ahead. It's fine. But that's a very common duo, the punitive parent and the vulnerable child. And sometimes you have to be aware of both of them to break that cycle. And that's where the word here is cultivation. We're cultivating the healthy adult version of you by imagining what she's like. It's like if you had to write a novel and you wanted to, you know, build a protagonist character, you might have to write about them a lot before you really felt like you knew them, that you could depict them properly in your writing. So you have to imagine this pro version of you. I don't mean like you don't have a job anymore and you only play poker. God forbid that would ever be the case. But, you know, the pro version of you that actually treats poker in a more responsible, professional way, what's she like? And just keep imagining it.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well, since like starting this coaching, I think during sessions, I've been enjoying more spotting places where I can do stuff based on things I've learned as well, like check raising in spots where I would probably have never, I'd just check folded, but then kind of, you know, when we're talking about like when the second pair, the second lowest card comes on the turn, it favors more the person who's being passive and calling, and like just kind of realizing that sort of stuff, not only as the aggressor, but as a passive person who's playing against a, like, not a fish, like a reg, who I know is quite reggy and like plays kind of like me and like would be able to kind of fold to things like that. Yeah, I think I've just enjoyed being a bit more of the curious player since I've started these. Definitely, I'm way more curious now and trying little things here and there that I just wouldn't have done. Definitely a good point for me.
And enjoyment is so linked to that, because like when that curious child is playing with the building blocks, they're like absorbed, they're like immersed in it. And I think this feeds into mode 1 thinking, which is all about instincts and intuition and not having to get lost within like overly complex logical circuits, but just sort of having clear and succinct ideas about what we're doing and enjoying it. That's what it's all about.
Good.
Okay, so let's move on to your second item that you've brought here, mental game problem. What's that?
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if this is also related to results, but like I've always had a problem with getting really annoyed when I'm card dead. When I'm card dead, I get annoyed. But then what makes it even worse is when we get like queens plus, like aces, kings, queens, and we open and we get a walk and pick up the blinds, or like we're sitting there fold, and we get ace jack off in the small blind, 3-bet a cut off open, then they 4-bet, and we're like, for God's sake, now I've got to fold. Like this kind of thing annoys the hell out of me, because if I sit there folding away and then I either pick up the blinds with a walk or get 4-bet in a spot where I can't be calling 4-bets, but a 3-bet was fine. It just annoys me.
So that part of you then that's annoyed by that, what did they want to happen? So you 3-bet the ace jack off and you got 4-bet and you had to fold, because any diligent player folds ace jack off to a 4-bet, which is good.
Yeah.
But what did that part of you want to happen instead?
That part wanted them to either call and then flop comes down amazing for us, or fold.
And how often did that part of you want one of those two things to happen instead?
Every time.
Every time.
Yeah.
How reasonable is that part of you? And if you had to place it in one of the schema that we've just talked about, who is that Is that a child? Is it a parent? What kind of scheme is that?
That's a child.
What child? What kind of child?
Like an angry child, like losing their shit over something happening.
Okay. I have a big one of those. It's so big sometimes that it like turns me into like a demonic, horrible, hulking monster. Not physically, because I don't have like massive muscles or anything, but I become pretty intolerable, and it's always been my problem. It's always been like the inner brat that kind of ruins days out when I was 5, or like kicks the other kid and ruins the birthday party or something like that. And I can relate to that really hard. I can really relate to that. That kid wants its cake and it wants to eat it. It wants things to go right all of the time, and it has very low tolerance for adversity or things going wrong. Why do you think we have an inbuilt reaction, tantrum and throw the toys out the pram, so to speak, when we face adversity? Like, why was that once beneficial in our lives, and at what point in our lives was that reaction most beneficial?
It would have been as a kid, maybe, because if you kick off, like, the parents might just give up on you and just give you whatever it is you were wanting.
Worked for me. Thanks, Dad. You made me an absolute cunt of a person. Thanks for that, mate. Just kidding, I love my dad, but he was quite lenient for large parts of childhood because he felt kind of bad for the way some of my childhood had gone. It was a bit of a rough, turbulent time at certain points. My parents split up when I was pretty young and blah, blah, blah. But my dad was very lenient. You know, he let me away with murder sometimes and let me, like, hit him and kick him, and he didn't want to do anything about it because he was like, well, yeah, this kid's obviously stressed, he's going through a tough time, whatever. But yeah, it made me empowered to tantrum, and it really like built up the tantruming muscle memory of doing that. So yeah, you're absolutely right. The point in our life when we get the most out of tantruming is when we're young enough, we're perceived as an infant by our parents, and the mere act of screaming, at the very least, it gets attention, which is good, which is better than like suffering without attention. And then at the most, as you say, we just get our way and they cave. They don't want to deal with it. They don't have the willpower on that occasion. And we win and we get the thing that we wanted. We get that scoop of ice cream or whatever it may be. That never goes away. That learned behavior doesn't go away. And if you imagine that you have this healthy adult version of you as well that can choose to be there. But what's currently happening is that if your brain is a control room, those people up there in the control room are designating those situations to the tantruming child. They're basically going, oh, this is your area. Go. Oh, look, we got ace king and missed the flop again. This is your domain. And the child's like, yeah, I'll handle this. So maybe this one is a case of reallocation. Let's practice. We have ace king. We're a bit card dead. We 3-bet. The flop comes 9-8-7 with a suit we don't have, and our opponent donks for pot. You fold because you're not a terrible poker player. Right? High praise indeed. My coach said I'm not a terrible poker player. How amazing. You fold. What does the tantruming child do there? What did they say? And then the second part of the exercise would be, who should handle that and what would they say?
So the tantruming child goes off on one about how they always miss the flop and 3-bet pot with ace king.
Is that true?
Not at all.
Right, so they actually make up lies to overstate things to make it seem more unfair because they're trying to get attention, not consciously. It's not like you're saying to Twitch chat, guys, feel sorry for me, but your inner child is crying out for sympathy here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh my God. I am. I'm looking for sympathy from the Twitch chat, and Jesus.
Or if you're not playing on Twitch, you're looking for sympathy just in general to the world. You're just sort of lamenting it on your own. You're still tantruming in some sense. It's the same mental program. Yeah. Okay, now who should handle that situation?
Future Jess, who's very calm and measured and is a decent poker player, and realizes that that was a good fold and that was all it is. And the 3-bet was fine and the fold on the flop was fine and we done everything fine. It's just that sometimes we don't hit the flop and have to make folds.
And what stage of life is that version of you at? Is that a child or a teenager, an adult or a geriatric? Who's that?
That's an adult. Yeah, it's just a chill adult who knows what they're doing.
Yeah, it's good when you get to feel like a chill adult. It doesn't happen to me that frequently, but when I get a moment of like I painted the gate the other day, like I varnished the gate, and I was like, I'm such a fucking beasting adult. Like I absolutely nailed this Sunday afternoon. I didn't want to. The kid was tantruming the whole way. Every time I got paint on my hands, the kid was like, wow, we shouldn't be doing this. But the adult completed it, and then I felt great. So this comes back to upside, like we said earlier. What is the upside of handling that in a mature, responsible way? Well, what do you think? Imagine that every time you were in a session, you didn't get incredibly frustrated every time you miss a flop, because you miss a lot of flops. There's no limit hold'em. It's almost impossible to make a good hand in this game. You play 6-card PLO if you want to like bypass that, but you're playing no limit hold'em. So what's the upside of not tantruming when you're card dead or when you miss or when you get 4-bet when you have ace jack off?
Just having a calmer demeanor through the session. Just not acting kind of reactively to different things.
How does it feel when you tantrum? Is that an enjoyable experience?
No.
How do you view yourself when you're doing that?
It's hard done by. It's just feeling hard done by and like a bit daft because you like shouting in a room that's empty. You're only in the room on your own and you're like shouting stuff out about missing flops. You're just like, who am I talking to?
Punched myself in the face like pretty hard once because I made a call that I didn't want to make, but my inner brat made me make the call, and then my inner brat punched itself as a repercussion. This is a long time ago. I was pretty young. I was like, and then like the pain of having punched yourself in the face in a room on your own. That's when you know you've got fucking issues, man. That's when you know you've got issues. If you ever get to that point, then yeah, maybe poker's not for you. But hey, I'm still here somehow, so.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think I'd punch myself. I think I'd punch a wall. Like, that could be a thing I've done.
That's slightly less insane to punch a wall than to punch yourself. Yeah. One of them hurts your hand more, one of them hurts your face more. It's like, choose your poison. So that's what I want you to do on the second point, to reiterate, is really be aware of which mode you're in. Try and see the behavior for what it is, which is a tantruming cry for help. And then I think it'll be, once you call out that behavior is what it is, I think it'll be much more natural for the adult you to step in and say, oh wait, this is a great opportunity for me to work on bringing the future Jess into the equation and actually enjoying the session more. Because when I tantrumed, I hated it. I felt like a piece of shit whenever I was tantruming as a kid. There's no way anyone feels good about themselves or enjoys the feeling of tantruming. It's not a nice feeling at all in any way. So by tantruming, we're also letting that child part cause harm to the rest of us by putting us in a situation where our self-image is one of being ashamed of our behavior and all of that. So
yeah.
Okay, so hopefully that helps on that front. What's your third mental game leak that you've brought today?
Well, there was two linked, but actually one of my, I think it is a mental game leak, is kind of deciding when to kind of focus on study rather than playing. I think it's quite easy for me to learn, and it happened going through here. I went through like 6-7 episodes of the Carrot Poker School, all really helpful stuff. But then like I kind of get this thing in my head where I'm like, okay, now I can just play. Like I've learned lots of stuff and I just then focus way more on playing than actually kind of building my knowledge. And then when I've got no kind of video series to watch through, I think I don't do enough hand review. I don't kind of jump into Poker Tracker and kind of go through hands and see what I'm doing right or wrong. Like I don't really do any of that sort of analysis. I think a lot of the stuff is at the table.
And I would say that hand analysis is even more important than going through theory. Like if you were only ever going to do one, I would say do the hand review. While theory is really important, and I would never want to like undersell my course. I think it's a great course. But if you were going to do CPS and not do any hand review, that wouldn't be very good. If you were going to do only hand review and no CPS, that wouldn't be good either, but it'd be preferable to never doing hand review, because hand review is actually, it's the glue that attaches what you're doing at the tables to what you understand about the game and the objective. And without that glue, there's a big dissociation between in-game you and out-of-game you, long time to think you and short time to think you, conscious and subconscious, all of these things. There's a big disconnect that grows ever deeper there, the less hand review we do. So try and see hand review as the glue that puts the theory into practice, basically. Very important thing. When you don't want to do hand review, do you ever have the thought about doing hand review? Do you ever think like, I should be doing this, but I'm not?
Yeah, I think probably about once a week, I think I should do more hand review. I don't do enough. And then I think quite a lot of the time it's almost like not knowing how to do it. It feels like it's another skill that I don't actually know. It's kind of like, I don't actually know how to hand review my sessions. I just see tons of hands, like maybe 1,000 hands that we've played that day. And like, how do I get that down to something useful?
So it's an absolutely like insurmountable task at the moment. It just feels really daunting. And when we look up at a big steep mountain, we just say, hell no, I'm not climbing that generally. Let's make it really bite-sized. Let's make the whole process extremely easy and light. What is the lightest type of hand review I could prescribe? It would be that when you play a session, you review one hand, only one. I don't even want you to do any more than one. I don't even want you to strive for 2 or 3. I just want you to review one. I want it to feel really easy, not intimidating at all. The other thing is how to do it. When we don't know how to do something, we stay away from it. If I look at like a bit of furniture that needs assembled, I'll get my girlfriend to do it because she's good at assembling furniture. I'll just be like, no, I'm not going near that shit. Like I'm not fucking touching it with a screwdriver because I'll break it, and I just shy away from it. So when you look at hand, there's a good chance that you think if Pete was here, I would be able to like review it with the coach or whatever, but how do you do it on your own, right? That's kind of the problem. Any thoughts on that then? How should you handle that dilemma that you don't know how to review a hand? Should you just say, well, in that case, I can't do it? Or what would be some alternatives?
No, obviously just kind of like learn how to do it. Like pick, I don't know, like a spot, maybe 3-bet pots. If I feel like I've been failing a lot in, I don't know, like if we've missed the flop a ton with ace king off, like maybe just reviewing some hands, seeing what kind of flops we do, then going maybe into GTO wizard, jumping on there and seeing what kind of hands we could be c-betting with there, that kind of thing. Like just doing a bit of analysis of trying to understand the bigger picture. Like, okay, so that probably wasn't a good hand to c-bet, and that's cool that I didn't, but what hands can we that are still in our range at this point?
Yeah, and why? Like, what's the pattern there? So if we do review, I think running a hand in a solver is excellent if you use the solver correctly, and it can be a disaster if you don't, right? So if you look at a solver and just go, that's not a c-bet, this is, end of story, I'll remember that. No, you won't, because you've not prescribed any reasoning to it. When things are totally arbitrary, like if I gave you a string of 30 numbers and said, remember these, you wouldn't be able to do it. But if I gave you like a poem or a sentence of 30 words, you could probably remember that much more easily because it's less arbitrary. When things are arbitrary, they're just, forget it, it's a lost cause. So if you are going to use a tool such as GTO Wizard, Pile Solver, or any other software like that, Ruse Solver, have to mention Ruse Solver or Jared will be unhappy with me when he watches this, then the best thing for you to do would be to say why. Like, okay, well, it's folding this hand on this turn against the turn c-bet. Why is it folding that, but it's calling another hand? What does this hand have that my hand doesn't, that allows this hand to call, but my hand has to fold? What's the key there? Can I pick out one thing? The other thing I'd say is really good for hand review is productivity. By that, I mean, don't just think about the hand. Don't just like absorb what the solver's telling you or what your coach is telling you or whatever, or what you're telling yourself, but actually write it somewhere, produce it. Write a paragraph. Like you could even say, after every session, I'll review one node. I won't even review one hand. I'll review just one node. I'll really focus on something like, I didn't know whether to call this turn bet. That can be a whole question. That can be an essay question in poker. You could sit down at a poker exam and a legitimate question that you could answer in 2 hours could be, explore the viability of calling this hand to this turn bet. There's a lot you could say there. There's studies you could reference. You could like put solver charts. You could honestly like fill out an exam question with just something like that. So don't be too broad. A narrow focused lens is generally much better when it comes to hand review than trying to review an entire hand or an entire session. So one node, I have this hand, I have a question about it. How am I going to answer that question? I'm going to look at the solver. I'm going to try and write out what I understand and what I've learned. And I'm going to think about what CPS would say. This is where you get to bring the two together. Like I said, it's the glue. If you want to glue CPS to your game, hand review is the super glue. It literally is the thing you should use.
Yeah.
So what does CPS say?
Good.
What do I think? What does the solver say? And why? Why? It's the name of the game, right? So does that make it feel like a more digestible thing now?
Yes, I think so. And actually, I think I posted a hand somewhere yesterday I'll look it up. In one of the Discords, I posted it, and I think I did put like my thoughts about it. And I think that was me doing that. I was looking at, okay, I maybe shouldn't have bluffed here on the river. It was an overbet bluff on the river. And when I quickly had a look at the GTO Wizard, it wasn't doing it with my hand, but it was doing it with like, I think I had like 8-6 suited, and it wasn't doing it with 8-6, but it was doing it with 9-6. And I was trying to figure out why 9-6.
Don't try and figure that out. Don't try and figure that out, because some of this is what I mean about solvers. Some of the stuff in solvers, you're actually dealing with a really small EV swing. So like 9-6 is better than 8-6, obviously because of some kind of blocker phenomenon, right? It depends on the spot. It could be that the meta game is such that the other solver knows that you're getting here with more this than that, so it calibrates to folding more 8x than 9x, therefore your 8 blocks their folding range a bit more than their 9 does, but it's only based on the fact that they arbitrarily fold ace-8 more than ace-9 or something like that. And at this point you have to ask, what's the relevance to the real world here? Like, what does this actually mean? Nothing at all. It's nonsense. It's solver metagame babble, basically. It's gobbledygook. Okay. A much better question there, and this will help guide your hand review in future, would be, how does my overbet bluff perform against pool? And you can still explore that with the solver, but you have to go to the next node, and you have to say, how does the solver react to the overbet? Oh wait, they're meant to call all these hands. I don't think humans are calling those. I love my overbet. Fuck you, solver. I don't care about your babble about whether I should have an 8 or a 9 blocker. This is going to overperform. It's going to get more fold equity. It could well be that you should have bluffed the hand. The solver isn't God. It doesn't get to tell you what's right in the human domain. It can only tell you what's right in its arbitrary domain. Now, when the spot's really vague and common, like flop c-bet, like, okay, if it's saying don't c-bet 2 undercards out of position on 10-9-8, like if it's saying don't c-bet 4-3 suited on 10-9-8 blind versus blind, it's right. Like, that's a bad c-bet generally. You shouldn't make that c-bet, usually, on a board like that. However, if it's telling you that on the river, the players have arrived with a really niche, like weird, exact range, well, that's wrong, because like the ranges have diverged everywhere on the game tree up to that point. And then when it's telling you use an 8 as a bluff but not a 9, it's time to give the middle finger to the solver. Yeah, at that point.
All right, okay.
And that feels good. Now you can be a teenage rebel and you can rebel against the solver. That seems fine.
Yeah. Don't do it too much though. I feel like the solver would be like the very wise elder who has got like quite a lot of good ideas, but is wrong sometimes.
I think the solver is like a really intelligent person that's lived in a shed for their entire life. So they have an excellent brain, but they don't actually know how the real world works. And they've come up with a theory of how you should live in the outside world based on like some descriptive factors, but they don't actually know how people act and behave and what's out there. I think that's what the solver is. So it might be very good at saying, well, 6 times 9 is 54. Like, I figured that out because I'm really clever. I figured, not that you have to be really clever to figure that out, but you get the point. But it wouldn't be very good at actually knowing what other people's behavior was going to be on any given situation, perhaps, right? It's like ChatGPT. It's good up to a point, or like an AI image generator. It's good up to a point, but it doesn't quite grasp reality. That's why there are like eyeballs growing out of people's hands and stuff like that in AI generated images. Yeah, be careful with how you use the solver. So hopefully today, to summarize, has given you a good view of, I think the biggest thing is how you deal with your results orientation program, which is a punitive parental program that's trying to protect the vulnerable child. And we talked about going more into healthy adult mode, doing the 3-stage visualization where you wallow in the pain and accept it, and then you visualize the best response future you is going to do, and then you look at the upside. So that's something you want to do over and over again every day. Basically, with the second thing you spoke about, we talked about this like card deadness, this frustration, this tantruming. And I think the main solution there is just to say, well, who do we want to delegate this to? Do we want to delegate this to a tantruming inner brat, or do we actually want to process this and handle it like an adult? And I think that'll take willpower and it'll take practice. But the more of these areas we remove from the brat, the better. Like, let's take the power away from the child there. It shouldn't be the one handling that program. And let's empower the adult to delegate better and say, no, we're not giving that to the angry child. Let's give it to the explorative child. I missed the flop with ace king again. How fascinating. Should I c-bet? What an interesting conundrum. Curiosity, much better than frustration there. Much more fun as well. And then thirdly, obviously we've had a decent discussion there about how to use solvers, how to do hand review, why you should do hand review, and make it bite-sized, breaking it down. Just one node per session. Play for an hour, review for 10 minutes. Just review one node. It's not that bad. But it is the glue it's needed to bring things into focus. So how has today left you feeling overall?
Good. Really, really positive to kind of take a lot of this into my sessions, especially the hand review and kind of dealing with the tantrum in child. I think that's a massive leak of mine for sure. Yeah. So like having a coping strategy for that and having a thing where I can think about it differently would definitely help 100%.
I think you've done the right thing by bringing this up. A lot of people don't want to have a mental game conversation like this because it's a little bit uncomfortable and it's like exposing some of the things you're not the most proud of about your poker game and poker self. And it does have repercussions of how you see yourself in life as well. You said things like optimal Jess would be in better shape and she would have a better life and she would do all these things. And I do think it's related. I think like healthy poker life, healthy real life is definitely a correlation. So I hope this sort of thing is also going to be useful. You might find in other areas of life that some of your mental programs actually aren't just exclusive to poker, but they fire up in the general domain as well. And maybe you can be more aware of them. But hey, I'm a poker coach. I'll go back inside my poker coach box now and stop preaching about how you should live your life. All right, guys, on that note, we are going to be rotating students very soon. We're going to have to love and leave Jess and bring someone else onto the show to replace her for season 3 of Coaching Journeys. So I'll be posting details about how to apply for that very soon. Have a think about whether it might be for you. Could you add something interesting to a YouTube series? Are you dedicated? Are you passionate? Are you eager to improve your game and go through this same journey? Because if so, I'd love to hear from you. Would love to have you on the show. All right, Jess, thanks. Yeah, that's Jess's advice. Do it. All right, so anything else to share? Happy for now?
No, yeah, that's all. Thanks.
All right, let's do it, guys. We'll see you on the next episode. And yeah, good luck at tables. Don't be a brat. Work on your mental game. Review your hands. Bye for now, guys.
Thanks.